On an ordinary day at the park, a millionaire enjoyed the moment alongside her young daughter. Suddenly, a ragged girl appeared, her eyes wide as she pointed and shouted, "She is my twin sister!" The millionaire, in shock, observed the striking resemblance between the two girls, feeling her world turn upside down. What seemed like a mere coincidence soon became a devastating discovery, one capable of changing their lives forever. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us from which city you're watching and stay with us as we continue. The autumn sun painted the sky of New York with golden hues as Charlotte drove her luxury car through the city's bustling streets. Her fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel, a habit she had developed over the past 10 years since fully taking the reins of the tech empire she had built alongside her husband, William. Beside her, in the passenger seat, 10-year-old Olivia hummed a children's song softly. Charlotte glanced at the girl, feeling a wave of love and protectiveness wash over her. Olivia was her most precious treasure, the only link still connecting her to the past, to William and the life they had before. "Mommy, do you promise we'll stay at the park for a long time today?" Olivia asked, her eyes shining with anticipation. Charlotte smiled, feeling a pang of guilt. She knew she didn't dedicate as much time to her daughter as she wanted, always caught up in endless meetings and business trips. "I promise, my love, today is all ours." As she parked near Central Park, Charlotte made a silent promise to herself to be more present in Olivia's life. The girl leaped out of the car the moment it stopped, her contagious energy making Charlotte laugh. The park was filled with families enjoying the sunny day. Children ran and screamed, dogs barked cheerfully, and the aroma of popcorn and cotton candy lingered in the air. Charlotte held Olivia's hand firmly as they walked toward the playground. "Look, Mom, can I go on the swings?" Olivia pointed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Of course, sweetheart, but be careful, okay?" Charlotte watched attentively. As Olivia ran toward the swings, she sat on a nearby bench, her eyes never leaving her daughter. It was a habit she had developed over the years, a near-obsessive need to protect Olivia from any danger. As Olivia played, Charlotte allowed herself to relax a little. The sound of children's laughter and the rustling of leaves in the trees was a welcome contrast to the corporate environment she was used to. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sun warm her face. When she opened them again, her heart nearly stopped. Beside Olivia, on the adjacent swing, was another girl. A girl who looked exactly like her daughter. The same wavy chestnut hair, the same bright green eyes, even the same smile. Charlotte blinked several times, certain she was hallucinating. The two girls chatted animatedly, laughing and swinging in perfect sync. Charlotte stood up, her legs trembling slightly as she approached. "Olivia," she called, her voice betraying her confusion and concern. Both girls turned to look at her simultaneously, and Charlotte felt the world spin. It wasn't an illusion. The resemblance was undeniable, shocking. "Mommy!" Olivia exclaimed cheerfully. "Look, I made a new friend. Her name is Lily." Lily. The name echoed in Charlotte's mind like a distant bell. She observed the other girl with a mix of fascination and fear. Lily smiled shyly, and that's when Charlotte noticed it. On Lily's left wrist, there was a small star-shaped birthmark, exactly like Olivia's. "Hi, Mom," Lily said, her voice sweet and familiar. "Olivia told me you came to spend the day at the park. That's so cool." Charlotte tried to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Her mind raced, searching for logical explanations for what she was seeing. Coincidence? Some kind of elaborate prank? "Do you know each other?" Charlotte finally managed to ask, looking from one girl to the other. Olivia shook her head. "No, Mommy, we just met. But it's so cool. Lily likes the same things I do, and look." She lifted her wrist, showing her birthmark. "She has the same little mark as me." Lily nodded enthusiastically. "I've always wanted to meet someone with a mark like mine. It's like we're sisters or something." Lily's words hit Charlotte like lightning. Sisters. The possibility, no matter how absurd it seemed, planted itself in her mind and refused to leave. "Lily, sweetheart," Charlotte began, trying to keep her voice calm. "Are you here with your parents?" Lily's smile faltered slightly. Actually, I came with the lady from the orphanage. She's right over there. The girl pointed to a middle-aged woman sitting on a nearby bench, watching them attentively. Orphanage. The word echoed in Charlotte's mind, bringing a flood of questions and possibilities she had never considered before. "Mummy, can we play?" "A little longer, please," Olivia asked, tugging on Charlotte's sleeve. Charlotte looked at her daughter, at Lily, and then at the woman from the orphanage. Her mind was a whirlwind, but she knew she needed to stay calm, at least in front of the girls. "Of course, sweetheart. A few more minutes, okay?" She forced a smile. I'll talk a little with Lily's guardian." As the girls returned to their swings, Charlotte walked toward the woman, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Each step brought her closer to a truth that could change everything she knew about her life, her family, and her past. What had started as a simple day at the park was about to turn into the beginning of a journey Charlotte could never have imagined. A journey that would unearth long-buried secrets and test the limits of love, family, and identity itself. Charlotte approached the woman sitting on the bench, her heart hammering against her chest. 1,000 questions formed in her mind, but she knew she needed to stay composed. "Hello," Charlotte said, her voice slightly trembling. "I'm Charlotte, Olivia's mother. I believe you're looking after Lily today." The woman stood up, extending her hand with a gentle smile. "Nice to meet you. I'm Sister Anne. Yes, I'm responsible for Lily today." Charlotte shook the offered hand, noting the curiosity in Sister Anne's gaze. "I'm sorry to intrude, but the resemblance between Lily and my daughter is striking. Do you happen to know anything about her past?" Sister Anne's expression subtly changed, a mix of surprise and caution. "Well, Mrs. Charlotte, I understand your curiosity. The resemblance is truly remarkable. Unfortunately, we know very little about Lily's past. She arrived at our orphanage as a baby." Charlotte felt a lump form in her throat. "And her parents?" "We have no information about them," Sister Anne replied with a tone of regret. "Lily was left at the orphanage doorstep when she was only a few weeks old." The words echoed in Charlotte's mind, bringing back memories she had long tried to suppress. The night Olivia was born, the confusion after labor, the persistent feeling that something wasn't right. "Mrs. Charlotte, are you okay?" Sister Anne's concerned voice pulled her back to the present. Charlotte blinked rapidly, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. Yes, sorry. This is just a lot to process." At that moment, the laughter of Olivia and Lily reached her ears. Charlotte looked at the two girls playing carefreely, completely unaware of the storm of emotions unfolding just a few feet away from them. "Sister Anne," Charlotte began, her voice now firm with determination. "I know this might sound crazy, but would it be possible to do a DNA test between Lily and Olivia?" The nun's eyes widened, clearly surprised by the request. "Mrs. Charlotte, I understand your concern, but this is a very serious procedure. We would have to go through official channels, obtain authorizations." "Please," Charlotte interrupted, her voice almost pleading. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll cover all the costs. I need to know." Sister Anne studied Charlotte's face for a long moment before slowly nodding. "I'll see what I can do. But Mrs. Charlotte, you must understand, whatever the result, Lily's life at the orphanage is the only one she knows. Any change must be considered very carefully." Charlotte agreed, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. "I completely understand. Thank you, Sister Anne." As she returned to the girls, Charlotte found herself torn between hope and fear. What if Lily really was? No, she couldn't allow herself to think about that yet, not until she was sure. "Mommy," Olivia's cheerful voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Can we get some ice cream? Lily has never tried pistachio." Charlotte forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's all get some ice cream." As they walked toward the park's ice cream stand, Charlotte watched the two girls holding hands, chatting excitedly as if they had known each other for years. The resemblance between them went beyond their physical appearance. Their gestures, the way they laughed, even the way they tilted their heads while speaking, were identical. At the ice cream stand, Charlotte watched as Lily tasted pistachio ice cream for the first time. her eyes widening in delight, just like Olivia's always did. It was like watching a mirror, an alternate version of her own daughter. "Aunt Charlotte," Lily said timidly, licking her ice cream, "thank you for the treat. It's the best I've ever had." Charlotte's heart clenched upon hearing Lily call her aunt. Part of her wanted to hug the girl, to tell her that perhaps, just perhaps, she was more than a simple stranger. But she knew she couldn't. Not yet. "I'm glad you liked it, Lily," Charlotte replied with a warm smile. As the girls enjoyed their ice creams, Charlotte couldn't stop thinking about what she would do next. How would she explain this to Olivia? How would she handle the possibility of having another daughter, one who had grown up away from her for 10 years? The sound of her phone snapped her from her thoughts. It was Margaret, her longtime housekeeper. "Mrs. Charlotte, is everything okay? You're taking longer than expected." Charlotte hesitated for a moment before responding. "Margaret, something happened, something that could change everything. I need you to prepare the guest room when we arrive, and you might want to sit down. I have a lot to tell you." Hanging up the phone, Charlotte looked again at the two girls. Olivia and Lily were now sharing their ice creams, laughing at some private joke. The scene was so natural, so perfect, that for a moment Charlotte wondered if she was dreaming. But it wasn't a dream. It was the beginning of a journey that would test everything she believed about family, love, and destiny. A journey that had started with a simple day at the park and now threatened to unravel secrets buried for a decade. As the sun began to set on the horizon of New York, casting long shadows over the park, Charlotte knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The empire she had built, the life she had carefully planned, everything was about to be turned upside down. And amidst all this uncertainty, two identical girls continued to laugh and play, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. Two twin stars, separated by a decade of secrets, finally reunited under the orange sky of an autumn afternoon. Twilight had already painted the sky in dark shades when Charlotte's car passed through the gates of the mansion. In the back seat, Olivia and Lily were dozing, their heads resting against each other as if they were pieces of a puzzle finally put together. Charlotte looked in the rearview mirror, her heart tightening at the sight. How would she explain all this to Olivia? How would she deal with the inevitable questions to come? And Lily? What would happen to her after tonight? Margaret, the family's trusted housekeeper for over a decade, was waiting at the entrance of the mansion. Her eyes widened when she saw the two identical girls stepping out of the car. "Mrs. Charlotte," Margaret whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What is going on?" Charlotte took a deep breath. "Margaret, please take the girls into Olivia's room. I'll talk to you shortly." As Margaret guided the sleepy girls inside, Charlotte headed to her office. She needed a moment alone to organize her thoughts and perhaps find some clue that could explain this surreal situation. The office, with its dark wood-paneled walls and bookshelves full of volumes, had always been her refuge. But tonight, it felt suffocating. Charlotte walked to the large window overlooking the garden, watching the long shadows stretch across the carefully tended flower beds. A soft knock on the door brought her back to reality. Margaret entered, carrying a tray with tea. "The girls are asleep, ma'am," Margaret informed her, placing the tray on the table. "Olivia insisted that Lily sleep in her bed. They seem so close." Charlotte nodded, picking up a teacup. "Margaret, sit down, please. We need to talk." The housekeeper obeyed, her rigid posture betraying her anxiety. "Margaret," Charlotte began, her voice low and controlled, "you have worked with us since before Olivia was born. You were present at the hospital that night, weren't you?" Margaret visibly paled. "Yes, ma'am, I was there." "I need you to tell me everything you remember about that night. Every detail, no matter how small." Margaret hesitated, her fingers nervously intertwining in her lap. "Mrs. Charlotte, there are things about that night that might be better left in the past." "No, Margaret," Charlotte insisted, her voice gaining urgency. "The past has caught up with us today. That girl, Lily, she is identical to Olivia. Same age, same birthmark. I need to understand what happened." Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage. When she opened them again, they were filled with tears. "That night," she began, her voice barely a whisper. Something went terribly wrong. Margaret took a deep breath, as if the weight of her memories was too much to bear. Charlotte leaned forward, her hands gripping the armrests of the chair. "Go on," Charlotte urged. "Tell me everything." Margaret hesitated for a moment longer before speaking. "That night at the hospital, there was chaos. I remember hearing shouting coming from the delivery room. Dr. Reynolds was there, giving orders, looking agitated. Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. Dr. Reynolds had been the highly regarded obstetrician who had handled her pregnancy, a man who had always seemed so calm, so professional. Margaret continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "After you were taken to your room, I saw nurses running back and forth, and then I heard it. The cries of 2 babies. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. 2, she repeated, her voice barely audible. Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes, Mom, 2. But when I went to see you later, there was only Olivia. When I asked about the other baby, a nurse looked frightened and told me I must be mistaken, that there had only ever been 1 baby." Charlotte felt the world tilt around her. The suspicions, the nightmares that had haunted her for years, the feeling that something had been stolen from her. It was all real. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Charlotte asked, her voice shaking. Margaret lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I tried, ma'am. But Dr. Reynolds, he called me into his office the next day. He warned me that if I ever mentioned hearing 2 babies, I would lose my job and never work in the healthcare field again. I was afraid. I had bills to pay, a family to support." Charlotte stood abruptly, pacing the office as her mind raced to connect the pieces. "William," she murmured, remembering her late husband. "He suspected something. In the months before he left us, he was restless, always researching something on his computer, making calls late at night." Margaret nodded. "Mr. William seemed troubled during that time. I overheard him mentioning Dr. Reynolds more than once, always with anger in his voice." Charlotte turned to Margaret, her eyes blazing with determination. "I need to speak with Dr. Reynolds first thing tomorrow morning, and I'll need your help, Margaret. We have to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it is." At that moment, a high-pitched scream echoed through the mansion. Charlotte and Margaret exchanged alarmed glances before rushing toward Olivia's room. They found the 2 girls sitting up in bed, trembling, their identical faces pale with fear. Tears streamed down their cheeks. "Mom," Olivia sobbed, "we had the same dream, a scary dream about a hospital and a man in a white coat separating us." Lily, still in Olivia's arms, nodded, her wide eyes filled with terror. It felt so real, like a memory. Charlotte sat on the bed, pulling both girls into a tight embrace. As she comforted them, her gaze met Margaret's. The 2 women shared a silent understanding. The truth, buried for so long, was finally rising to the surface, and with it revelations that would change the family forever. As the night deepened over New York, the mansion became the center of a mystery that had been hidden for a decade. A mystery that, once unraveled, would redefine the meaning of family, love, and identity for everyone involved. The morning sun found Charlotte already awake, pacing her office, her mind buzzing with unanswered questions. She barely noticed Margaret entering with a fresh cup of coffee. "Mrs. Charlotte," Margaret said softly, "the girls are still asleep. What are you planning to do today?" Charlotte turned to face her. "I'm going to the hospital. I need to speak with Dr. Reynolds. He's the key to all of this." Margaret hesitated. "And the girls?" "I need you to stay with them, Margaret. I don't want them involved. Not yet." Before leaving, a thought struck Charlotte. William's journal. She vaguely remembered seeing it after his passing, but at the time she had been too consumed by grief to read it. Hurriedly, she went to their old bedroom, rummaging through drawers and cabinets until she found the small, leather-bound book. With trembling hands, she opened it, feeling the weight of William's unspoken words. The first pages were filled with happy memories. Their wedding, the joy of discovering Charlotte was pregnant. But as she flipped further, the tone shifted. William wrote about suspicions, overheard conversations, and meetings with nervous hospital staff who seemed too afraid to speak. One entry in particular caught her eye. "Something isn't right. Reynolds is acting strangely. I've heard whispers of illegal adoptions, missing babies. I have to protect Charlotte and our daughter, or daughters. The sound of 2 newborns crying that night haunts me. I'm close to the truth, but I fear the consequences. Charlotte's heart pounded. William had known, or at least he had suspected, and now 10 years later she was about to uncover the truth he had sought. With renewed determination, she tucked the journal into her purse and headed for the A hospital. The St. Luke's Hospital, once a symbol of trust and excellence, now loomed over Charlotte like a foreboding monolith. She strode through the white corridors, the echoes of her heels on the linoleum floor the only sound in the quiet early morning. At the reception of the obstetrics wing, she took a deep breath. "Good morning. I need to see Dr. Reynolds. It's urgent." The young receptionist looked up hesitantly. "Dr. Reynolds is in a consultation right now. Would you like to schedule an appointment?" "No," Charlotte said firmly. "Tell him Charlotte is here. He will see me." Minutes later, Charlotte was led into Dr. Reynolds' office. The doctor, now older, with streaks of grey in his hair and deep lines on his face, stood to greet her. "Charlotte," he said with a forced smile. "What a surprise. What can I do for you?" Charlotte held his gaze, her voice ice cold. "You can start by telling me the truth, Reynolds, about the night Olivia was born." The doctor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I don't understand, Charlotte. It was a normal birth, no complications. What more is there to say?" Charlotte leaned forward, her eyes piercing. "How about the fact that there were 2 babies?" Reynolds visibly paled but quickly recovered his composure. "2 babies? Charlotte, I think you're confused. Maybe the stress of... Don't lie to me." Charlotte slammed her hands on his desk. "I know something happened that night. William suspected it, and now I have proof." Reynolds studied her for a long moment before sighing heavily. "Charlotte, there are things that happen behind hospital doors that are complicated. Difficult decisions sometimes have to be made." "What kind of decisions justify separating twins?" Charlotte demanded, her voice laced with emotion. The doctor turned to the window, avoiding her gaze. "You wouldn't understand. It was for the greater good. Families who couldn't have children, babies who would have better chances." "Better chances?" Charlotte repeated, disbelief washing over her. "You stole my daughter." Reynolds turned back to face her, his eyes filled with a strange mix of guilt and justification. "It wasn't theft, Charlotte. It was reallocation. We believed we were doing what was best." At that moment, the office door swung open abruptly. An elderly nurse stepped in, her face resolute. "Enough, Dr. Reynolds," she said firmly. "I can't stay silent any longer." Charlotte recognized the woman. It was Mrs. Patterson, one of the senior nurses who had been at the hospital when Olivia was born. "Mrs." the nurse began, her voice trembling slightly. "I was there that night. I saw everything. 2 identical baby girls, both healthy and perfect. Dr. Reynolds, he ordered one of them to be taken away immediately. He said it was part of a special program." Reynolds slumped into his chair, looking suddenly much older. "You don't understand, Patterson. We were helping families, balancing the scales." "Balancing?" Charlotte's voice cracked with rage. "You destroyed families. You separated sisters." "Mrs." Patterson stepped closer, placing a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "Mrs., I have documents, evidence. I've been holding on to them for years, waiting for the right moment." Charlotte turned to the nurse, gratitude and relief washing over her. Finally, the truth was coming to light. Charlotte took the folder Mrs. Patterson handed her, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. Inside were birth records, hospital transfer documents, and handwritten notes that confirmed her worst fears. There were no adoption papers, no legal documentation that would justify what had happened that night. It wasn't an adoption. It was something far worse. "You separated newborns," Charlotte whispered, her voice shaking. "You stole children from their mothers." Reynolds buried his face in his hands, his silence a confession of guilt. Mrs. Patterson's voice was firm. "Dr. Reynolds, it's time to take responsibility. You need to tell her everything." Reynolds let out a long breath before finally speaking. "It wasn't just me," he admitted, his voice hollow. "There were others, people higher up, people with..." Tahour, This program had been going on for years. They called it Operation Balance. Charlotte clenched her jaw. Who? Who is behind it? Reynolds shook his head. I don't know their names. I only followed orders. The hospital received funding from anonymous donors. We were told it was for research, for social betterment, but over time, it became clear that wasn't the truth. Charlotte exhaled sharply, struggling to contain her rage. And you just went along with it? You let them take my child? Reynolds met her gaze, guilt etched deep into his features. I was weak, Charlotte. I convinced myself that these children were being placed into better lives, that I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. Where was Lily taken? Charlotte demanded. Who received her? Reynolds hesitated. I don't know. The babies were assigned numbers, not names. They were placed in different homes, some legally, some not. But if she ended up in an orphanage, it means something went wrong with her placement. Mrs. Patterson placed a hand on Charlotte's arm. I know this isn't enough, but I saved what I could. I have names of some of the people involved. Doctors, nurses, administrators. It might help you find answers. Charlotte swallowed hard, glancing down at the folder. This was the proof she needed, but it also meant stepping into something much bigger than herself. If you're truly sorry, she said to Reynolds, you'll cooperate with the authorities. You'll help me bring these people down. Reynolds hesitated, then nodded. I'll do what I can. But Charlotte, be careful. These people won't let this go easily. Charlotte stood, clutching the folder to her chest. I don't care how powerful they are. I'm going to expose every single one of them. With a final glance at the defeated doctor, she turned and left the office, Mrs. Patterson walking beside her. You're a brave woman, Mrs., the nurse said softly. Your husband would be proud. Charlotte stopped in her tracks. You knew William? Mrs. Patterson nodded. I do now. He came here years ago asking questions. I was too scared to help him then, but I knew one day someone would come looking for the truth. Tears burned Charlotte's eyes. William had tried to uncover the truth, and now she was finishing what he started. Thank you, she whispered. As she stepped out of the hospital, the cool morning air hit her like a wave. She had what she needed, proof that her daughter had been taken from her. But now she had an even greater battle ahead. She had to find out who was truly behind this, and she had to keep Olivia and Lily safe. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out and saw a message from Margaret. A man came by the house asking questions about Lily. I told him nothing, but I don't. Like this, Mom. Please come home soon. Charlotte's blood ran cold. They knew. She wasn't just uncovering a scandal, she was stepping into a war, and her daughters were now in danger. Charlotte's hands tightened around her phone as she read Margaret's message again. A cold dread spread through her chest. They knew. Whoever was behind this had already started moving against her, and if they had come to her house, then Olivia and Lily weren't safe. She rushed to her car, dialing Margaret's number as she climbed inside. Margaret, what happened? Charlotte demanded as soon as the call connected. Margaret's voice was tense. A man showed up an hour ago asking about Lily. He was dressed like a lawyer, but something felt off. He asked if you had any intentions of adopting Lily, if you had taken her for a DNA test. Charlotte's grip on the steering wheel tightened. What did you tell him? Nothing, Margaret said firmly. I told him I was just the housekeeper and didn't know anything about your business. He didn't like that, said he would be back. Charlotte's stomach churned. Did he leave a name? No, Margaret said, but he left a card. No name, no firm, just a phone number. Charlotte took a shaky breath. They were being watched, and now that she had proof, they would do anything to silence her. I'm on my way home, she told Margaret. Lock the doors, don't let anyone in. Stay with the girls at all times. Understood, Margaret said. But Ma'am, I think you need to be careful. These people, they don't seem like the kind that back down easily. Charlotte ended the call and started the car, speeding toward the estate. She needed to think. She needed to plan. But most of all, she needed to protect her daughters. She had expected this fight to be difficult. She hadn't expected it to be dangerous. By the time Charlotte arrived at the mansion, The sun was already dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the driveway. She parked and rushed inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. Margaret met her at the door, concern etched into her features. "The girls are upstairs," she said. "They don't know anything yet." Charlotte exhaled, relieved. "Good. We need to keep it that way for now." She took the card Margaret had mentioned, a plain white card with nothing but a single phone number in the center. No name, no firm, no identity. It was a message they weren't hiding, and they wanted her to know it. Charlotte clenched her jaw. They thought they could intimidate her, that she would be scared into silence. They had no idea who they were dealing with. She turned to Margaret. "I need to make a call. Can you watch the girls?" "Of course," Margaret said without hesitation. Charlotte stepped into her office and closed the door. She sat at her desk, staring at the phone number on the card. Then, without allowing herself to hesitate, she dialed it. It rang once, twice. Then a man answered. His voice was calm, too calm. "Mrs.," he said smoothly. "I was hoping you'd call." Charlotte's spine stiffened. "Who are you?" "A concerned party," the man replied. "I believe you've been asking a lot of questions, digging where you shouldn't." Charlotte's grip on the phone tightened. "You mean looking for my stolen daughter? That kind of digging?" A pause, then a chuckle. "You don't understand, Mrs. You're playing a very dangerous game. And people who play dangerous games don't always win." Charlotte's blood boiled. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning," the man said, still infuriatingly calm. "You have 2 daughters to think about now. Perhaps it's best to leave the past where it belongs." Charlotte's heart pounded. He was talking about Olivia and Lily. He knew. "You stole my child," she hissed, "and you think I'll just let that go?" "I think you should be careful," the man replied, "before something unfortunate happens." The line went dead. Charlotte stared at the phone, her breath coming in short, furious gasps. They weren't just watching her, they were threatening her daughters. She forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't let fear control her. She had proof. She had names. And now she had a new mission. Expose them, bring them down, and make them pay for what they had done. She wouldn't stop. She couldn't stop. Because this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about protecting her family. And Charlotte would do whatever it took to keep her daughters safe. Charlotte remained frozen, gripping the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The man's voice echoed in her head. "You have 2 daughters to think about now." He knew about Lily. He knew about Olivia, and he wanted her to back off, but they had underestimated her. With renewed determination, she grabbed the folder of evidence she had received from Mrs. Patterson and flipped through the names. If she was going to take them down, she needed to act fast. She pulled out her phone and dialed Rodrigo, her old friend and one of the few people she trusted. "Charlotte," he answered immediately. "I was just about to call you. There was a break-in at the hospital last night. The records department was destroyed." Charlotte closed her eyes, the dread settling deeper. "They're trying to erase everything." "Exactly," Rodrigo said, "but I have a feeling that's not the worst of it." "What's going on?" Charlotte took a breath. "I have proof, birth records, documents, names, but I also just got a phone call. Someone warned me to stop looking." Rodrigo was silent for a moment. "Charlotte, if they're threatening you, it means you're close to something big. I don't care how big it is," she said fiercely. "I want them exposed. I want them behind bars." "Then we need to move fast," Rodrigo said. "I have a few contacts in the FBI who might be willing to take this on. But we need to be smart. If we go public too soon, they'll bury this before we can get them." Charlotte exhaled. "Tell me what to do." Rodrigo hesitated. "First, you need to get somewhere safe. If they came to your house once, they might come again. You can't stay there." Charlotte's stomach twisted. "I can't just run. Olivia and Lily." "You're not running," Rodrigo interrupted. "You're protecting your daughters. Find somewhere secure. I'll meet you there, and we'll figure out our next move." Charlotte gritted her teeth. She didn't want to leave. But she also knew Rodrigo was right. "Fine," she said. "I know just the place." She hung up and rushed upstairs, finding Margaret in Olivia's room. The two girls were playing with dolls, oblivious to the storm that was brewing around them. "Margaret," Charlotte said in a low voice, "pack bags for the girls, we're leaving." Margaret's expression darkened. "Are we in danger?" Charlotte nodded. "Yes, and I won't take any chances." Margaret didn't ask any more questions. She simply stood and began gathering things. Charlotte knelt in front of Olivia and Lily. "Sweethearts, we're going on a little trip, okay?" Olivia blinked. "A trip? Where?" "Somewhere safe," Charlotte assured her. "It's going to be fun, I promise." Lily hesitated. "Are you okay, Aunt Charlotte?" Charlotte forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just need to make sure we're all safe." Lily didn't look convinced, but she nodded. Within minutes, they had packed essentials, and Charlotte led them out of the house. As they drove away from the mansion, she felt a sense of unease settle over her. She wasn't just leaving her home. She was stepping into a war, and she wasn't sure who would make it out alive. Charlotte drove through the dimly lit streets, her grip on the wheel firm. Every car that passed, every pair of headlights in the rearview mirror, made her pulse quicken. Were they being followed? Were the people behind this already aware that she was on the move? She needed to think strategically. Rodrigo had been right. Her house was no longer safe. But there was one place where she knew they wouldn't look for her. The family had an old vacation cabin deep in the mountains, a place William had loved taking Olivia when she was younger. Isolated, off the grid, and only accessible by a long dirt road. It was the perfect hiding spot. Margaret sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at the girls who had fallen asleep in the back. "Are you sure about this, Mum?" Margaret asked in a hushed voice. Charlotte nodded. "They won't expect us to go somewhere this remote. I just need time to go through the evidence, to figure out our next step before they find us." Margaret sighed, shaking her head. It's terrifying how quickly life can change. One moment, everything is normal, and the next, Charlotte's hands tightened on the wheel. The next you find out that your child was stolen from you and that powerful people will do anything to keep you quiet. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights slowly disappearing behind them. The road became narrower, the buildings replaced by towering trees. As they approached the turnoff that led to the cabin, Charlotte glanced at the rearview mirror one more time. No cars, no signs of movement. Maybe, just maybe, they had gotten away unnoticed. She took the hidden dirt road, driving carefully over the bumpy terrain. After a few more miles, the cabin finally came into view. It was exactly as she remembered, small, rustic, and completely cut off from the world. She parked the car and gently shook Olivia and Lily awake. "We're here, sweethearts," she murmured. Olivia yawned, rubbing her eyes. "Where is this?" "It's our cabin," Charlotte said. "We used to come here when you were little." Lily glanced at the structure hesitantly. "It looks kind of spooky." Margaret chuckled. "That just means it has character." Charlotte unlocked the cabin and turned on the lights. It was dusty from years of disuse, but it would serve its purpose. She ushered the girls inside while Margaret started making the place more comfortable. Once the children were settled, Charlotte sat at the old wooden table and spread out the documents from Mrs. Patterson. Names, dates, records, all proof of what had been happening for years. She pulled out her phone and dialed Rodrigo. "I'm here," she said as soon as he answered. "Good," he replied. "Are you alone?" "Just Margaret and the girls," Charlotte said. "No one followed us." "Not yet," Rodrigo muttered. "Listen, I've been looking into that phone number you gave me. The one from the man who called you." Charlotte's stomach twisted. "And?" "It's untraceable," Rodrigo said. "Whoever he is, he knows how to cover his tracks." Charlotte exhaled sharply. "That's what I was afraid of." "But there's something else," Rodrigo continued. "I dug through some old records and found a name connected to Operation Balance. A man named Victor Langston." Charlotte frowned. "I don't recognize that name." "You wouldn't," Rodrigo said. "He's a high-level businessman, operates mostly in the shadows. He's one of the biggest donors to private adoption agencies. And—" Rodrigo hesitated. "And what?" Charlotte pressed. "And," Rodrigo sighed, "he was close to William." Charlotte felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean, close?" "I mean, William worked with him on several projects. investment deals, charity events, even medical research. Charlotte's mind reeled. Could William have known about this all along? Had he been involved? No, he had been investigating it before his death. If he had been working with Langston, maybe he had uncovered something that got him killed. Charlotte swallowed hard. I need to meet with you. We need to take this to the authorities before they can silence us. I agree, Rodrigo said, but we have to be smart. If Langston is involved, then this goes deeper than we thought. A sudden noise outside made Charlotte freeze. Rodrigo, I have to go, she whispered. Someone's here. She ended the call and turned off the lights. Margaret, realizing something was wrong, grabbed the girls and ushered them into a bedroom. Charlotte moved to the window and peeked outside. A single black SUV was parked at the edge of the dirt road. Its headlights were off, but she could see figures inside, watching, waiting. Her heart pounded. They had found them. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat as she watched the dark SUV at the edge of the dirt road. The figures inside didn't move, but their presence was unmistakable. They weren't lost, they were waiting. She turned away from the window, forcing herself to think. Panic wouldn't help. She had to stay in control. Margaret stood in the doorway, her face pale but composed. What do we do? She whispered. Charlotte's mind raced. They couldn't stay here. It was only a matter of time before the people in that SUV made their move. But they also couldn't just run blindly into the night. We need a plan, Charlotte murmured. Margaret nodded. Do we wake the girls? Charlotte hesitated. Olivia and Lily were safe for now, but for how long? Another option came to her, one that she had hoped to avoid. Rodrigo, she whispered. Margaret frowned. Can we trust him? He's the only one I do trust, Charlotte said firmly. And we need backup. She pulled out her phone and texted Rodrigo. They found us, black SUV outside the cabin. I need help. The message sent. A few agonizing seconds passed. Then a response. Stay inside. I'm on my way. Don't do anything until I get there. Charlotte exhaled slowly, her grip tightening on the phone. Margaret, she said quietly, take the girls to the back room. Keep them quiet, no lights. Margaret nodded and hurried away. Charlotte turned back to the window. The SUV hadn't moved, but they were watching, waiting. What were they planning? She took a slow breath, willing herself to stay calm. If they tried to come inside, she would be ready. Rodrigo was coming. She just had to hold on until then. The air inside the cabin felt thick, heavy with tension. Charlotte remained by the window, barely breathing as she observed the SUV. No one had stepped out yet, but she could feel it. Whoever was inside was waiting for the right moment. Margaret returned quietly. The girls are in the back room, she whispered. They're scared, but I told them it's just a game of hide and seek. Charlotte forced a nod. Good. We need to keep them calm. Minutes crawled by. The silence outside was deafening. Then, a car engine in the distance. Charlotte's pulse spiked. Was it Rodrigo, or was it more of them? Headlights flickered through the trees, and then relief flooded her. A familiar sedan pulled onto the dirt road. Rodrigo. The SUV's engine roared to life. Charlotte tensed as the black vehicle backed up suddenly, tires kicking up dust, and sped off into the night. Before Rodrigo could block the road, cowards. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But the relief was short-lived. Whoever they were, they knew where she was now, and they would be back. Rodrigo parked haphazardly and jumped out of his car, gun in hand. He scanned the area before rushing toward the cabin. Charlotte opened the doctor before he could knock. They were just here, she said, voice tight. Rodrigo cursed under his breath. I saw the tire tracks on my way up. They must have been watching you for hours. Charlotte closed the door behind him. What do we do now? Rodrigo holstered his weapon and exhaled. We need to move. This place isn't safe anymore. Charlotte ran a hand through her hair. Where? Do we go? Rodrigo's jaw clenched. Somewhere they won't expect. But first we need to talk. I found out more about Victor Langston. Charlotte motioned for him to follow her to the kitchen. Margaret stayed near the back, keeping an ear on the girls. Rodrigo placed a file on the table. Langston isn't just some businessman. He's one of the key financiers behind private adoption networks across the country. But here's the worst part. He's been doing this for decades. Charlotte's stomach twisted. You're saying he's been stealing children for years? Rodrigo nodded grimly. It's bigger than we thought. He wasn't just funding adoptions. He was orchestrating transactions. Rich families desperate for children. Corrupt hospitals willing to look the other way. It was a full-scale operation. Charlotte swallowed hard. And William? How does he fit into this? Rodrigo hesitated. I don't think he was part of it. I think he was starting to uncover it. That's why he was acting so strangely before he died. He found out what Langston was doing, and I think he was trying to stop it. Charlotte's hands curled into fists. And that's why they killed him. Rodrigo's silence was confirmation enough. She felt a wave of grief and fury rise inside her. William had known. He had been so close to exposing everything, and they had silenced him before he could. Charlotte straightened. Then we finish what he started. Rodrigo gave her a steady, "Look, that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Charlotte took a deep breath. We need to get the girls out of here first. Somewhere safe, and then we take Langston down. Rodrigo smirked. Now that sounds like a plan. The war had officially begun. Charlotte wasted no time. She walked toward the back room where Olivia and Lily were waiting, their wide eyes filled with questions they were too afraid to ask. Margaret sat beside them, offering quiet reassurance, but even she couldn't hide the tension in her posture. Charlotte crouched down, forcing a warm smile. Sweethearts, we need to go on another little trip, but this time we have to be extra quiet, okay? Olivia frowned. Why? Is someone chasing us? Lily, ever observant, clutched Olivia's hand. Is it because of me? Charlotte's heart squeezed at the fear in Lily's voice. She reached out and stroked the girl's hair. No, darling, this is not your fault. None of this is. Margaret stood. I'll pack up the rest of our things. Charlotte nodded and turned back to Rodrigo. Where do we go? Rodrigo pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. I have a safe house about an hour from here. It's off the grid, no connections to you. We can lay low while we plan our next move. Charlotte exhaled. Then let's move, fast. Margaret helped the girls into their jackets while Rodrigo went outside to check the perimeter. Charlotte grabbed the evidence folder, stuffing it into her bag, then took one last look around the cabin. This was supposed to be a place of safety, now it was compromised. Okay, Rodrigo called from outside. Coast is clear, let's go. They moved quickly, piling into Charlotte's SUV. Rodrigo took the lead in his own car, and Charlotte followed closely behind. The drive was tense. The night felt heavier than usual, as if unseen eyes were watching from the darkness. Charlotte kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting the black SUV to reappear at any moment, but the road behind them remained empty. After nearly an hour, Rodrigo turned onto an unmarked dirt road that led to a secluded house deep in the woods. It was small, unassuming, with reinforced windows and a security system that blinked faintly in the darkness. They were safe. For now. Once inside, Charlotte made sure the girls were settled before joining Rodrigo in the kitchen. He had already spread out papers and a map on the table. We don't have much time, he said. Langston knows you're a threat now. He's going to escalate. Charlotte sat down, running a hand through her hair. Then we need to strike first. Rodrigo nodded. I've been working on something, a way to expose everything, but we need to get the right people involved, people Langston can't silence. Charlotte clenched her jaw. What's the plan? Rodrigo leaned forward, his eyes dark with determination. We take this story public. We make sure there's nowhere for him to hide. Charlotte exhaled slowly. This was it. The final battle had begun. Charlotte stared at the map Rodrigo had spread across the table, her mind racing. Every instinct told her that exposing Langston publicly was the right move, but also the most dangerous one. If we take this story public, she said, voice low, he'll come after us harder than ever. Rodrigo nodded grimly. That's why we need to be smart. We need to control the narrative before he does. If we time it right, we can make sure he has nowhere to run. Charlotte's fingers tightened around the folder of evidence. Who do we trust with this? The police? Rodrigo hesitated. Not just any police. Langston has connections everywhere. We need federal oversight, people outside his immediate influence. Charlotte exhaled sharply. You said you had contacts in the FBI. Can they be trusted? Rodrigo pulled out his phone. I know someone, Special Agent Eric Lawson. He's been investigating organized trafficking for years. If anyone will take this seriously, it's him. Charlotte nodded. Call him, set up a meeting. Rodrigo stepped away to make the call, leaving Charlotte alone at the table. She stared down at the documents, the birth records, the falsified hospital files, the financial transactions linking Langston to the illegal adoption ring. William had died trying to uncover this. Now it was up to her to finish what he started. Margaret entered quietly. The girls are asleep, she said softly. I told them we're camping for a few days. Charlotte forced a smile. Thank you, Margaret. For everything. Margaret sat across from her. You know I'd do anything for you and Olivia. She hesitated before adding, and for Lily too. Charlotte swallowed the lump in her throat. She is my daughter. I don't need a DNA test to know that. Margaret smiled faintly. I know, and she knows it too, deep down. Before Charlotte could respond, Rodrigo returned. Lawson agreed to meet, Rodrigo said, his voice low. But we have to be careful. He doesn't want to talk over the phone. He knows how deep this goes. He's sending us a secure location for the meeting. Charlotte nodded. Good, the sooner we do this, the better. Rodrigo's phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen. Got it, he wants to meet in 2 hours. An abandoned airstrip outside the city, neutral ground. Charlotte's pulse quickened. This was it, the turning point. Either they exposed Langston and took down the operation, or they walked straight into a trap. Margaret frowned. And what about the girls? We can't take them with us. Charlotte hesitated. They stay here, you stay with them. Margaret didn't like it, but she nodded. I'll keep them safe. Charlotte turned to Rodrigo. Let's go. 2 hours later, abandoned airstrip. The old airstrip was desolate, surrounded by nothing but open fields and scattered debris. The wind howled through the cracks in the pavement as Charlotte and Rodrigo stepped out of the car. A black SUV was parked ahead. This time, though, it wasn't Langston's men. A tall man in an FBI windbreaker emerged, Eric Lawson. His sharp eyes scanned them, his posture tense. You have 10 minutes, he said. Show me what you've got. Charlotte wasted no time. She handed him the folder. This is proof of an illegal adoption ring that has been running for decades. Stolen children, falsified records, money trails, leading to Victor Langston. Lawson flipped through the documents, his expression darkening. Jesus Christ, Charlotte's heart pounded. We need your help to take him down before he covers his tracks. Lawson exhaled. This is solid, but it won't be enough to convict. We need testimony, witnesses willing to speak out. Charlotte squared her shoulders. I'll testify. I'll go public if I have to. Rodrigo tensed. Charlotte. No, she interrupted. This ends now, no more hiding. Lawson studied her for a long moment before nodding. All right, I'll get a task force together. But you need to be careful. Langston won't go down without a fight. Charlotte's jaw tightened. Neither will I. As they sealed the plan, none of them noticed the dark silhouette watching them from the distance. Langston knew, and he was, already making his next move. Charlotte and Rodrigo drove back from the meeting in silence, the weight of what they had just set in motion settling heavily over them. The plan was simple. Lawson would assemble a task force, gather more evidence, and move in on Langston before he could cover his tracks. But simple didn't mean safe. Rodrigo finally spoke. You realize this isn't over, right? Langston isn't going to just sit back and wait to be arrested. Charlotte tightened her grip on the steering wheel. I know, but I'm done being afraid. Rodrigo sighed. Just promise me you won't do anything reckless. Charlotte didn't answer. She wasn't going to promise something she couldn't keep. By the time they reached the safe house, it was past midnight. Charlotte was exhausted, but the sight of the warm lights glowing from inside gave her a sense of comfort. Margaret greeted them at the door, whispering, The girls are asleep. No trouble while you were gone. Charlotte let out a breath of relief. Good. She and Rodrigo moved to the small kitchen, speaking in hushed voices. Lawson said he'd move quickly, Rodrigo said. We just have to stay out of sight until then. Charlotte leaned against the counter, rubbing her temples. And what if Langston finds us first? Rodrigo hesitated. Then we fight. Before Charlotte could respond, a sound made her freeze. A thud outside. Rodrigo's hand went to his gun instantly. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Margaret stepped into the kitchen, her expression alarmed. Did you hear that? Another thud. Closer this time. Charlotte's heart pounded. Get the girls, she whispered. Margaret nodded and hurried toward the back room. Rodrigo motioned for Charlotte to stay low as he moved toward the front door, gun drawn. He peered through the small window. Anything? Charlotte whispered. Rodrigo shook his head. Nothing. But I don't like this. Then, glass shattered. In the back of the house, Margaret screamed. Charlotte's blood ran cold. They weren't waiting anymore. They were here. Charlotte didn't think. She moved. Heart pounding, she ran toward the back of the house, Rodrigo right behind her. Another crash echoed through the small safe house as heavy boots hit the floor. They were inside. Margaret was shielding the girls in the corner of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around them. Olivia and Lily clung to her, eyes wide with terror. Rodrigo raised his gun, his voice sharp. Show yourself! Silence. Then a whisper of movement. Charlotte barely had time to react before a dark figure lunged from the shadows. Rodrigo fired, once, twice, the shots deafening in the small space. The man staggered back, groaning in pain, but another took his place almost immediately. Get the girls out, Rodrigo barked, engaging in a fight with the intruder. Charlotte turned to Margaret. Take them through the back door. Get to the car, now! Margaret didn't hesitate. She grabbed the girls and bolted toward the exit. Olivia whimpered, but Lily turned back, her small voice trembling. Mum, go, Charlotte shouted. I'll be right behind you. Lily hesitated, but Margaret pulled her away, disappearing into the night. Another attacker lunged. Charlotte ducked, grabbing a lamp from the nightstand and smashing it against his head. The man stumbled, giving her just enough time to grab Rodrigo's spare gun from his belt. She aimed. Get out of my house, she snarled. The man hesitated. Then, seeing Rodrigo reloading, he bolted, following his injured partner out the broken window. Charlotte didn't wait. She grabbed Rodrigo's arm. We have to go. Rodrigo nodded, panting. Let's move. They sprinted, outside. The SUV was already running, Margaret in the driver's seat, the girls in the back, their terrified faces peering out the window. Charlotte and Rodrigo jumped in just as another set of headlights flared to life behind them. The black SUV, Langston's men. Charlotte barely had time to pull the door shut before Margaret floored the gas. The tires screeched as they sped down the dirt road, dust kicking up behind them. Are they following us? Margaret asked, her voice tight with fear. Rodrigo turned, gun still in his hand. Yes. Charlotte twisted in her seat. The black SUV was gaining on them, its headlights glaring like a predator closing in on its prey. Her pulse pounded. They couldn't outrun them forever. She turned to Rodrigo. Do we have a plan? Rodrigo's jaw clenched. Yeah, but you're not gonna like it. Charlotte's fingers dug into the dashboard as Margaret pushed the SUV to its limits, speeding down the winding dirt road. The black SUV behind them stayed close, relentless. Rodrigo reloaded his gun. We can't outrun them forever. We need to make a stand. Charlotte gritted her teeth. Not with Olivia and Lily in the car. Margaret swerved sharply around a bend, the tires kicking up gravel. We need a plan, now! Rodrigo scanned the road ahead. There's an old bridge, a few miles from here. If we can get there first, I might be able to stop them. Charlotte didn't hesitate. Do it. Margaret's hands were steady on the wheel as she pushed the SUV even faster. The girls whimpered in the back seat, but Charlotte twisted around and gave them a reassuring look. It's going to be okay, sweethearts. Just hold on tight. The black SUV accelerated. It was right on their tail now. Then, gunfire. Bullets shattered the back windshield. Olivia screamed, and Charlotte instinctively threw herself over the girls. "They're shooting at us," Margaret cried. Rodrigo rolled down his window and fired back, forcing the attackers to swerve. "Keep driving." Charlotte's mind raced. They were running out of time. Then she saw it, just ahead, the bridge Rodrigo had mentioned. It was old, rickety, barely wide enough for one car at a time. Rodrigo glanced at Charlotte. "Get ready." Margaret slammed the brakes as they reached the bridge. The SUV skidded to a stop. Rodrigo jumped out, pulling a small device from his jacket. A detonator. Charlotte's eyes widened. "You set explosives?" Rodrigo smirked. "Told you wouldn't like the plan." The black SUV barreled toward them. Rodrigo waited until the last possible second, then pressed the trigger. A deafening boom rocked the night. The bridge exploded in a fiery blast, sending the enemy SUV hurtling backward as the structure collapsed beneath it. Silence. Charlotte held her breath, staring at the smoking wreckage. The SUV was gone. The bridge was gone. Margaret exhaled, shakily. "Is it over?" Rodrigo watched the flames for a long moment. "For now." Charlotte turned back to the girls, both of them wide-eyed with shock. She pulled them into a tight embrace. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're safe." Rodrigo reloaded his gun. "Not for long. Langston won't stop until he's buried this story. And us along with it." Charlotte stood, her resolve hardening. "Then we don't give him the chance." She looked at Rodrigo. "We go public. Tonight." Rodrigo nodded. "Let's take this bastard down." The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Margaret drove away from the wreckage as fast as she could, the girls still trembling in the back seat. Charlotte sat between them, her arms wrapped protectively around their small frames. The explosion had bought them time, but not much. Rodrigo was already on his phone, his voice urgent. "Lawson, we've been compromised. Langston's men found us. We had to take them out." He paused, listening. "No, we're all safe. But we have to move now. Can you set up the broadcast?" Charlotte's pulse quickened. The broadcast. Going public was their last and best weapon. If they could get the evidence out to the world, Langston wouldn't be able to hide behind money and connections. Rodrigo hung up. "Lawson's pulling in favors. He's getting us a live interview tonight. It'll air nationally." Charlotte exhaled. "That's it then. No more running." Margaret glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" Rodrigo pulled up a location on his phone. "Safe house in the city. Lawson will meet us there. We go live in 2 hours." Charlotte tightened her hold on Olivia and Lily. "We end this now." An hour later, safe house. The safe house was an unremarkable apartment in the heart of the city, hidden in plain sight. Lawson was already there when they arrived, along with a small team of agents. The moment Charlotte stepped inside, Lawson handed her a microphone. "You sure about this?" Charlotte met his gaze. "Absolutely." Rodrigo set up the documents, the birth records, the financial transactions, everything they had on Langston. A technician signaled from the corner of the room. "We're live in 60 seconds. Charlotte took a deep breath. Then the countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The red light on the camera blinked on. Charlotte looked straight into the lens, her voice steady, strong. "My name is Charlotte, and this is the truth they tried to bury." She began to speak. She told the world everything. Charlotte's voice rang clear through the live broadcast. She kept her expression composed, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. For over a decade, a powerful network has been stealing children from their parents, falsifying birth records, manipulating hospitals, and selling innocent lives under the guise of adoption. And at the center of it all is a man named Victor Langston. She placed the stack of documents in front of her. "I have proof, financial transactions, hospital records, signed deals that link Langston to illegal adoption rings, and I am not the only victim. Hundreds of families have been torn apart by this operation." Rodrigo stood behind the camera, watching the live feed, monitoring the reaction. Social media was already exploding. The public was listening. Lawson nodded from across the room. "Keep going," he mouthed. Charlotte swallowed hard, glancing toward Olivia and Lily, who were watching quietly from the couch. Then she delivered the final blow. "Victor Langston, if you think you can silence me the way you silenced my husband, you are wrong. I will not stop until you are behind bars. And I'm calling on the authorities, the media, and every mother and father out there to demand justice." She held up a hospital bracelet, Lily's, the one she had worn the night she was stolen from her. "This is what you took from me, but I got her back, and now I am coming for you." The technician signaled, "We're out." The broadcast ended, but the impact was immediate. Phones buzzed, news channels scrambled, social media was on fire. Charlotte sat back, her heart pounding. "Did it work?" Rodrigo refreshed the newsfeed. "Oh, it worked." He turned the screen toward her. Langston's name was trending worldwide. Questions were being asked. The public was demanding answers. Lawson's phone rang. He answered, listened, and then looked up. "We've got movement. FBI units are already mobilizing." Charlotte exhaled sharply. "Then it's over." Rodrigo shook his head. "Not yet." Charlotte frowned. "What do you mean?" Rodrigo looked out the window. "Because Langston just lost everything, and men like him, when they're cornered." He turned back, eyes dark. "They become desperate, and that's when the first gunshot shattered the window. Glass exploded across the room as the first shot ripped through the window." Charlotte instinctively lunged toward Olivia and Lily, shielding them with her body. Margaret screamed, ducking behind the couch. "Down!" Rodrigo barked, drawing his gun. Lawson and his agents moved instantly, overturning tables for cover. Weapons drawn, another shot rang out, then another. "They found us!" Margaret cried. Charlotte's heart pounded as she clutched the girls tighter. "Move!" she shouted at Margaret. "Get them to the back room." Margaret grabbed Olivia and Lily, dragging them down the hall as more bullets tore through the walls. Rodrigo peeked through the shattered window. "Two shooters across the street, second floor." Lawson radioed his team. "We're under fire. I need backup at the safe house, now." Charlotte's mind raced. Langston wasn't running, he was retaliating. He wasn't going down without a fight. A grenade-like object flew through the broken window, clattering onto the floor. "Smoke bomb!" Rodrigo shouted. Thick, blinding. Smoke filled the room. Coughing, Charlotte felt someone grab her arm. "Rodrigo, we have to get out." "Margaret and the girls." "I'll get them," Lawson yelled, vanishing into the haze. The front door burst open. Heavy boots stomped in. Silhouettes of armed men emerged through the smoke. "Move! Move!" Rodrigo pulled Charlotte, firing into the fog. Someone screamed. Charlotte's vision blurred as she stumbled down the hall. Through the smoke, she saw Lawson guiding Margaret and the girls toward the back exit. "Go with them," Rodrigo ordered. "Get them out of here." Charlotte hesitated. "What about you?" Rodrigo smirked grimly. "I'll buy you time." Charlotte clenched her jaw. "Don't die." "Wasn't planning to." He turned, firing into the fog. Charlotte sprinted toward the back exit, where Lawson was shoving open the emergency door. The cold night air rushed in as Margaret dragged Olivia and Lily through. "Get in the van," Lawson commanded. Margaret climbed in with the girls. Charlotte followed, breathless, eyes darting for Rodrigo. "Where is he?" More gunfire erupted inside the building. Then, silence. Charlotte's heart pounded. "Rodrigo!" Then, staggering through the smoke, he emerged, bloody, limping, but alive. "Drive!" he rasped as he jumped in. Lawson floored the gas. Tires screeched as they peeled away from the safe house. Behind them, the building erupted in flames. Charlotte turned, watching the inferno rage. "They tried to kill us." Rodrigo wiped blood from his face. "Yeah, and they failed." Lawson gritted his teeth. "Langston's out of options. He's getting desperate. But this just made him our priority." Charlotte looked at Olivia and Lily, still shaking, still clinging to Margaret. She turned back to Lawson. "Then let's finish this." Langston wanted a war. He just got one. The van sped through the dark streets. the burning safe house disappearing behind them. Charlotte gripped the edge of her seat, heart pounding, adrenaline still surging through her veins. Margaret sat in the back, holding Olivia and Lily tightly, whispering reassurances as the girls trembled in shock. Rodrigo winced, pressing a hand to his bleeding arm. That was close. Charlotte turned to Lawson. We need to move now. Langston just declared war. We hit back tonight. Lawson's grip on the wheel tightened. I agree. After that attack, the Bureau will treat this as attempted murder of federal agents. We're mobilizing teams as we speak. Charlotte's jaw clenched. He won't stop, not until he's locked away or dead. Rodrigo smirked through his pain. Well, let's make sure it's the first option before we consider the second. Lawson's phone buzzed. He put it on speaker. Go, a sharp voice answered. We got eyes on Langston. He's moving fast. Private airstrip downtown. Looks like he's running. Charlotte's blood boiled. No, he doesn't get to escape. Lawson nodded. We're cutting him off. He turned to Charlotte. This ends tonight. She exhaled sharply, looking at Olivia and Lily, who clung to each other, their innocent eyes filled with fear. She had fought for them, suffered for them. Now she would finish this for them. Charlotte turned back to Lawson, voice cold, unwavering. Then let's go get him. The van raced through the empty streets, the city lights blurring past. Charlotte's grip tightened around the seat as she turned to Lawson. How much time do we have before Langston takes off? Lawson's eyes flicked to the GPS. 15 minutes. If we don't intercept him before he reaches that airstrip, he's gone. Charlotte's pulse pounded. We're not letting him escape. Rodrigo reloaded his gun. We need to assume he's got security waiting for him. He's not the type to run alone. Margaret's voice wavered from the back. And what about the girls? We can't take them with us. Charlotte turned, looking at Olivia and Lily. They were curled up against Margaret, exhausted, terrified. She took a breath. You take them somewhere safe and get as far away from this as possible. Margaret frowned. And what about you? Charlotte's gaze hardened. I end this. Margaret hesitated, then nodded. You come back to them. You hear? Me? Charlotte touched Olivia's cheek gently, brushing away a tear. I will. Rodrigo motioned to an intersection ahead. Drop them here. My contact has a car waiting to take them out of the city. Lawson pulled over just long enough for Margaret and the girls to get out. Charlotte watched as Olivia turned back, her small voice trembling. Mommy, please don't go. Charlotte's heart clenched, but she forced a smile. I have to, sweetheart, but I promise I'll be back. Lily clutched Olivia's hand. Be careful. Charlotte swallowed hard. I will. The moment, Margaret. And the girls were safely inside the waiting car. Lawson hit the gas. There was no turning back now. 15 minutes later, private airstrip. The airstrip was dimly lit, hidden behind tall fences. A private jet idled on the runway, engines roaring to life. Charlotte's breath hitched. He's here. Rodrigo checked his gun, and he's not alone. Several black SUVs were parked near the plane. Armed men surrounded the area, securing Langston's escape. Lawson's phone buzzed. FBI units are en route, but they're 15 minutes out. Charlotte's fists clenched. We don't have 15 minutes. Rodrigo smirked. Guess we're doing this the hard way. Lawson pulled out his badge. We take him alive. Charlotte's voice was ice. We take him down. The van screeched to a halt. Guns were drawn. And then the battle for justice began. The instant the van stopped, Charlotte, Rodrigo, and Lawson sprang into action. The airstrip was buzzing with movement. Langston's men were positioned near the plane, scanning their surroundings, unaware that their time was running out. Rodrigo crouched behind the van, gun in hand. We need to get closer before they realize. We're here, Lawson nodded. We flank them, take them by surprise. Charlotte's heart pounded. I want Langston alive. Rodrigo smirked. Can't make any promises. They moved quickly, using the shadows to their advantage. The roar of the jet's engines masked their footsteps as they closed in. Langston stood near the stairs of the plane, barking orders to his men. 5 minutes. We take off now. Charlotte's blood boiled. Not happening. Lawson gave the signal. Go! Rodrigo fired first, 2 clean shots. The nearest guards dropped before they even knew what hit them. We're under attack, someone shouted. Chaos erupted. Bullets ripped through the air as Langston's men scrambled for cover. Charlotte ducked behind a crate, breathing heavily. She spotted Langston climbing the stairs to the jet. No, you don't, she muttered, sprinting forward. One of Langston's men lunged at her. Charlotte reacted instantly, dodging his swing and driving her elbow into his ribs. He staggered, but she didn't give him a chance to recover. She grabbed his arm, twisted it, and slammed him to the ground. Rodrigo and Lawson pushed forward, cutting down Langston's defenses. Charlotte, Rodrigo shouted, go after him. She didn't need to be told twice. Langston was halfway up the stairs when he turned and saw her coming. His face twisted in rage. You should have walked away, Charlotte. Charlotte kept climbing. You should have never taken my daughter. Langston pulled a gun. Charlotte lunged. The shot rang out, missing her by inches. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it violently. The gun clattered down the stairs. You ruined everything, Langston snarled, swinging at her. Charlotte dodged and slammed her knee into his gut. No, Langston, I'm fixing everything. He stumbled but recovered quickly. Do you have any idea who I am? I own people like you. Charlotte's lip curled. Not anymore. She punched him hard. Langston crumpled onto the stairs, groaning. Sirens wailed in the distance. Lawson appeared at the base of the stairs, gun raised. It's over, Langston. Rodrigo smirked. Told you we'd take him down. Langston lifted his head, eyes filled with fury. This isn't over. You think this ends with me? You have no idea how deep this goes. Charlotte grabbed him by the collar. Then I'll keep digging. FBI agents swarmed the airstrip, securing the scene. Lawson nodded at Charlotte. You did it. Charlotte exhaled, her body shaking. No. She turned toward the city lights in the distance. It's not over until I'm home with my daughters. 1 day later, estate. Charlotte knelt down. As Olivia and Lily ran into her arms, holding them so tightly she never wanted to let go. Are you back? Olivia whispered, tears in her eyes. Charlotte kissed their foreheads. I promised, didn't I? Lily clutched her hand. Are we safe now? Charlotte met Margaret's gaze, then Rodrigo's. Yes, we're safe. Rodrigo grinned. And Langston, he's looking at a lifetime behind bars. Margaret sighed in relief. Thank God. Charlotte pulled Olivia and Lily into another hug. It's over. For the first time in 10 years, she could finally breathe. Her family was whole again,